Hello again. Stats SA says an estimated 370,000 jobs were gained between the fourth quarter of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022. This translates into a drop from 35.3% to 34.5%. This is on the backdrop of across-the-board price rises, placing a heavy burden on vulnerable consumers. Economist Phelisa Nkomo is going to help us to put a perspective on this for us. She's joining us now. Ms. Nkomo, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah, there's a slight gain in jobs, therefore a slight decline in the rate of unemployment. But as I was pointing out since yesterday, we still have just under 8 million people in this country who have no jobs.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I do think that these numbers are really sending mixed messages. So we shouldn't really be excited about the 270,000 jobs. But there are a number of things that we should be concerned about. I think the first issue is that in the last 5 years, for example, agriculture has been such a crucial sector that has held this economy together. In fact, every time there's been report, agriculture has always been on the growth side, and now it has declined. So clearly, it means that the Ukraine-Russian issues are really starting to hit home, and they're affecting us. But also, they're also presenting a massive opportunity for us to start planning better in terms of agricultural production for domestic consumption, so that we're not vulnerable. I think the second issue, what this data actually indicates, is the fact that actually the two sectors that have grown is community services, which is public works and community services. And again, it signals that without government, there's actually would have not been seeing this type of progress. I mean, almost, 8% of the jobs, 8.6% is actually coming from community service. And had we not had the community services or some infrastructure programs, so meaning that when we call for government to step in and deal with issues of infrastructure to stimulate, to deal with the economy, to using infrastructure to stimulate the economy from both demand side and supply side, is actually not a call that is, out of the blue, but in fact, there is an evidence that when state plays a very crucial role in the economy, we are actually able to see the difference.
I mean, I was wondering, sorry to cut in there, Ms. Go. I was wondering about that because according to the stats, the latest stats, you've got the cohort of young people in South Africa between the ages of 15 and 24, about 10.2 million of them. 3.8 million of them today are not in employment, not in education, and not in training. So you've got this pool of unskilled labor that can be used in projects, infrastructure projects.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the key things we've been calling, as a heterotomy, all the economists, progressive economists in this context, has been that we need to turn this country into a constructive site, at least for the next 2 years to 3 years. Part of the veil of that, the multiplier effect, are massive. I think firstly, you're going to engage young people who are currently disengaged, leading, unproductive lives. And they're actually growing because you see, when you also engage your younger generation very late in their lives, the risk, are massive in society in the long term. The second issue is that you're going to actually facilitate a circulation of income in the economy, but also firms are going to start, appointing people. And it's going to be an opportunity for those young people to actually get an exposure, because we know one of the, issues that private sector has been raising is a structural mismatch in our economy. And when you roll out infrastructure, in fact, you're going to be able to deal with that. But also fundamentally, those turning South Africa into a construction site, by the way, it's a short-term intervention. And I must say that. The long-term intervention is firstly, you need to deal with other macroeconomic tools at the disposal of the state. When we talk about infrastructure spending, it's a fiscal policy tools, which is government is spending its own money, which in fact, by the way, Treasury is sitting with more than 50 billion, within the infrastructure fund, which is meant actually for municipalities, and that's not happening. Part of it that has to do with the capacity of the state to be able to deliver. So I think that's one issue, and obviously it does impact on the issue of unemployment. And then there's another component around macroeconomic policy tools. I think the issue of interest rates, which we've experienced in the last 2 weeks. We understand that the argument is always that we want to protect the African economy from global supply shocks. But the implications for it, for example, are massive. One, it's the informal sector, for example, it's household, because households, it means that they won't have surplus income, they won't be investing, saving, or buying durable goods. But also women-owned businesses who consistently actually struggle to have access to credit. So the credit line extension is going to be a massive issue because it means that it's going to be high. So the capital cost to the economy are going to be higher. So the only beneficiaries, by the way, more often when you have an increase of interest rates are those who are sending hot money into the country, actually investing. But more often than not, but also in this context, where, for example, we're seeing now our economy is not going to be able to be growing for more than 2%, for example, in terms of GDP. And that's why I'm saying that these numbers are sending mixed messages, but the central messages as well these numbers are sending is that we need a better economic architecture between government, between private sector, between trade, but as well as communities. We need to galvanize South African citizens, but we're not going to be galvanized South African citizens when we're still choking them with interest rates. So it's actually, it's a contradiction in terms. But also at the same time, while there's a clear, kind of like social security intervention, but that's not sufficient because the social security interventions, in fact, are actually subsidizing the failure of economic, structural change or structural transformation.
There are
and we're not going to be able to continue.
Yeah, there are a number of matters here. You've touched on the short-term ones. I like that expression, 10 South Africa into construction site in the short to medium term, but in the long term, fix your macroeconomic structural issues. But you touch on one aspect there in terms of access to credit when you mention women-run businesses. If you look at unemployment stats, you find that the bulk of the people as well in this country who've been losing jobs are women. Particularly, you mentioned households. We have many, especially black women-headed households in this country. And these unemployment figures are not helping. And that's a big challenge.
No, absolutely. In fact, the data says almost 40% of black women are actually lead unproductive lives. They are unemployed, they're disengaged. Now, some of these women are actually in the informal sector, which of course they're not part of the stats, by the way. But one of the things though, which I'm actually going to drag it a little bit in this conversation, it's what some of the ANC policy document is talking about, which talks about one, access to support for informal sector, but as well as introduction of micro credit act, particularly to facilitate access for micro businesses. But profoundly, it raises something we've actually been saying is that you can't apply one size fits all in an economy that has a history of discrimination, exclusion, and separate development. So you need to be able to make sure that certain sectors, you treat them based on the context of those sectors. So in this context, how you fund informal sector cannot be the same in how you fund the formal sector. How you fund micro businesses and some of, as well as the compliance issues. I mean, a lot of businesses, for example, one of the things that even the micro ones who are formalized would not actually even declare some of their income or revenue. Part of it has to do with the fact that there's just too much compliance.
I mean, also how you view and support and help the black woman-owned enterprise, whether it's informal, small or medium size, also has to bear in mind the fact of where we've been as a country, where black women in particular suffered from triple oppression.
Absolutely, and it means that actually, firstly, the first issue is that the system has to trust black women, which currently it doesn't. And that's why consistently when women are loaning or are looking for credit extension, they carry a burden of high capital cost in a form of interest rates. They have to pay double digits, 12%, 16%. This is even the mistake that even the development finance institutions actually make, where they don't trust black women.
Yes.
And I think the second issue is to make it sure that you actually look at the public procurement framework as well to support black women. And there's also nothing wrong. The economy has to take some risk on black women and give them grants and see, because part of what we need to do is that when you build an entrepreneurship culture, that you can't be risk averse all the time. But you need to be able to. But of course, public procurement framework, presents a massive opportunity to facilitate the entrance of those women into business sector so that they can actually earn an income by selling their services into the public sector.
Yeah, we could talk until the cows come home, as they say, with the Phelisa Nkomo, economist there, around the challenges of the country that is facing. Thank you very much, Phelisa Nkomo. She's an economist, but also the other hat that she wears and under which I've spoken to her here on eNCA.